All right, so this is the Python seminar for anyone who's planning to teach Python in either the upcoming coding camp or maybe the ones after. But basically, what I'm going to try to go over is like how you should like structure your teaching, and also go over some specific examples of like how you would teach the concepts, and then also like some of the problems that you would go over with the students on coding that. So with the concepts, generally speaking, you I believe we do have like a slide deck for Python. You could use that, or you generally speaking, the most I guess efficient way is to just have repo.it open, or sorry, repolet.com open, and then um basically just like program on here and like kind of explain what you're doing. You can also use like the annotate feature for Zoom and basically like draw on the screen if you want to like illustrate some points, which I'll go over a bit later. And as for coding bats, it's kind of the same thing. Just like keep the students engaged. And honestly, with Python, what with at least with what I've noticed, um, generally speaking, the students do kind of not participate a lot when it comes to programming problems because they're generally afraid of being wrong. So sometimes you might have to just call on random people and just say like, "Hey, so and so, what do you think we should do for this problem?" And like, give them a little hint, here and there. Like, don't just expect them to do the problem on their own because most of the time that doesn't happen. But like, yeah. So we'll start off with like the conceptual, I guess, teaching part because that's what most of the classes are going to be. You don't really do like problems until I would say strings and if statements because that's what most of the coding bad problems require. So let's say, for example, I was teaching strings to like a group of students. Generally speaking, I would you could go off like the W3 Schools curriculum or the slides. Both of them are good options, but like try not to like show the actual website because generally, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes you just end up reading off the screen, and the thing is that the students do um I mean, well, they can read, so there's no point in just sharing the screen and then just reading off of it because the students do. I mean, they can read it and like look at the website themselves. So if I was going off the strings, I would first start off with like you have covered data types by the time you cover strings in depth. So I would just like remind them of what a string is. Like for example, it's a group of characters that we can write um and like basically during quotes, and each of these characters has its own index. That's usually the part that gets students like tripped up. Like the idea that you have to like count from zero and stuff. That all of that is very new to them because most of the time you count from one, right? So you kind of have to emphasize the parts that seem like unintuitive to new people. Because the thing is that most of these students, they've never worked with coding before. So they might not know things that kind of seem obvious to us now, like indexes start at zero and things like that. So you kind of have to just like remind them constantly, especially since they're usually like elementary or middle school kids, so they don't exactly have like too much of a attention span. So yeah, I would probably uh let's actually replace this with something useful. Like for example, with Hello World. If I was teaching like indexes to them, I would be like, okay, so in Python we have um these things called indexes, and this is how we like number the characters within a string. And then that's when I would probably like draw on the board and for example, like just list every character spaced out. For Zoom, you can I believe you can also like make your own whiteboard. So if that's something that you want to do, feel free to do that. And basically, I would just be like, so in computer programming, we always start from the index zero. Um, Unlike in actual counting, where we count from one, like in programming, we start from zero. So yeah, this would be index zero, and then the next one would be index one. So we would keep counting from zero. And then I will also remind them that, of course, we also count spaces as part of the characters. So this would be two, three, 4, 5, and then you can draw the rest, and then so on. Generally with these students, you also want to like use comparisons or like analogies that would make it easier to understand. Like for example, the most common thing that I do for strings is like I kind of compare it to like one of those medicine containers. Let me see if I can. It's like uh the different days on it. So yeah, like for example, these I'm sure a student has probably seen one of these before, and you can just kind of compare it to them, like, oh yeah, just like how, because the most, for example, for variables, you also compare them to containers usually. So like, oh, just like how variables are containers, strings you can kind of think of them as like each character holding a separate um like item in a separate container. So just like how this weekly pill organizer has multiple different sections to it, uh, the same thing applies to a string or a list. This would probably work better with a list, but like um, the main idea is that you should like try to make it easy for the student to understand. And generally speaking, the easiest way to do that is to compare it to things that the student is going to be familiar with. So yeah, that would be something I would do, and then just go down the list, explain each concept. So like after I explain indexes, we'll probably go onto like substrings or splicing, and I'll just explain like how we can like basically chop up a string and just like a real string where we can like chop it up into different pieces. We can do that with a string in Python. So that's what I'll probably do, and then we'll probably go on to lengths and whatever else is in W3 schools or the sides. And then yeah, you just keep going down the list. You uh as a recommendation, I would probably still have like the slides or W3 schools open. Maybe even if it's not on the computer, but like on like a separate like device such as your phone. Just so you can like look back and like know what things you've covered and what things you haven't covered. So like just don't read, my main point is just don't read off the slides, but like also make sure you're actually teaching them what you need to teach. So I think that should be it for the conceptual things. And then for the what's it, the coding back problems, generally speaking, you would do these a bit later. Uh I think for the past couple of coding camps, we've done them at around like week 5 or week 6 ish, because you need to learn a lot before you can actually start tackling the coding problem. So with the coding problems, generally speaking, the students are going to be less engaged because one, it's towards the end of the class period, which means that less and less kids are going to be showing up. And two, generally speaking, the coding problems are kind of new and difficult for most of the students. So they kind of like don't want to do it because they're afraid of being wrong, or they're just, they don't want to do it because it's too hard or whatever. So um, a good thing to keep in mind with the coding back problems is to just like make sure uh to keep track of who's participating and who's not, and just like kind of call on the people who are not participating. Don't like berate them or like kind of like say like, hey, why are you not participating? Like don't be aggressive or anything, but like just like ask them what they think. If they say I don't know, which honestly is the most common response, don't push it too much, or you can like give them a couple of hints to like guide them. But like for example, with this problem, we would have basically this is like a typical if else statement problem. So I'll first ask my students like, what kind of structures or uh yeah, what kind of structures do we need for this problem? And if I'm met with silence, I'll just like probably pick on someone to like answer. And if no one knows, then I would just say like, okay, yeah, for this problem we would use if statements because we can see that in the problem there are multiple instances of the word if, and then I'll kind of relate it back to like how Python and English, there's a lot of things that are similar. Like a lot of commands in Python are kind of uh they kind of mean similar things in English. So I'll just remind them of that and just be like, so as you can see here, we have like a condition if we are on vacation. So that can be something that will be programmed as an if statement. And similarly with the if we sleep in, that could be like maybe the else statement since we already have the vacation part. So then once we get the if, elif, and else parts done, then I would just like ask them to basically fill in the if part, like, oh, what kind of condition are we testing for the if statement? And of course, in this problem, it would be if weekday is true and what is it? And vacation is true. Sorry, or true. If weekday is true or vacation is true, that doesn't false. So yeah, also don't be afraid to make mistakes yourself. Honestly, like the students are not going to care if you mess up a couple of times here and there, as I did just now. Don't worry about it too much. And yeah, you would just basically continue the problem, have them fill up out line by line, and just don't try to rush it. Um, yes, these problems may take you like 30 seconds to solve, but for a student who has never, honestly, has never done coding problems before, this might take up the whole class period. Like you need to be prepared for that. And yeah, if you want to assign coding bad problems as homework, you can. Honestly, I feel like they're not as effective because one, the students can just click this button over here and get the solution, or two, they just end up not doing it. It will show up anyway. So if you assign these as homework, um, just make sure that the students who do the solutions, make sure to ask them like how they came up with it or for them to explain their code. So that way you know that they're not just copying off the solutions and then like maybe tweaking it here and there. But yeah, I think that should be it for this seminar. Um, yeah, so that's it. Good night, everyone.